On October the 3rd of 2017, an armed robber entered the KFC restaurant on Perkins Road in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. According to the resulting arrest warrant, the suspect was wearing all black clothes and a ski mask over his face and was holding a firearm and a hammer. He pointed the weapon at one of the employees' heads, then cocked back the hammer as though poised to strike and demanded money. Despite the robber's effort to disguise himself, he was almost immediately recognized by restaurant workers as Cleveland Willis. The 28-year-old had reportedly worked at the KFC for several months and thus was known by the two employees on duty that night. One of the workers even asked the suspect, "Cleveland, is that you?" To which the man allegedly replied, "No, it's not me." Both cash registers were opened and the robber made off with roughly $600. He then fled the scene in a Nissan Altima, the same car Willis used to drive to work. In the aftermath, the KFC employees spoke with detectives, stating that they'd recognized their former co-worker because of his voice and the features of his face that were visible through the holes in the mask. About a week and a half later, the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office announced that Willis had been taken into custody in connection with the armed robbery. Number 6. Aaron Burell, Yvonne Thyberg, and Marvin Myers. 3 suspects broke into a house in Roswell, New Mexico in late September of 2014 after allegedly stealing a television. The burglars hopped in a getaway car and sped off. As they were making their escape, one of the suspects accidentally pocket-dialed 911. Emergency dispatchers listened as the trio gloated about their crime, unaware that their conversation was being monitored and recorded. One of them could be heard saying, "I know we should have gotten a lot more, but you know what? My only thing is that we got away safe, clean." According to the police, the Bon Jovi song, "Wanted, Dead or Alive," started playing at one point during the call. The inadvertent confession continued for about 45 minutes, during which the suspects mentioned the address of the home they'd burglarized. Officers were sent to the residence and the homeowner confirmed that the place had been robbed. Investigators were able to trace the unwitting 911 call to a phone belonging to 37-year-old Aaron Burell. The latter was arrested in early October but denied any involvement in the crime. He claimed that his phone had been picking up a loud conversation taking place in a vehicle adjacent to his. Nevertheless, he was charged with residential burglary, conspiracy to commit residential burglary, and receiving or disposing of stolen property. Burell's 2 accomplices were identified as Yvonne Thyberg and Marvin Myers. At one point during the accidental 911 call, Thyberg reportedly revealed that the burglarized home belonged to one of her relatives. Both she and Myers likewise faced burglary charges following their arrest. Number 5. Jacqueline Williams. On October the 30th of 2012, British Transport Police were made aware of a video posted to YouTube in which a woman hurled racial obscenities at a group of black passengers on board a train in Woolwich. The belligerent woman was identified as 47-year-old Jacqueline Williams from Slade Green, Kent. In the viral 40-second clip, Williams was recorded telling the group, go home where you belong. You might have been born here, but I bet your grandparents and your great-grandparents weren't." She then added, "If you belonged here, you'd be pink-skinned, blonde-haired, blue eyes, green eyes." As Williams stepped off the train at Abbey Wood, she continued verbally abusing a 21-year-old NHS worker who was looking after a lady with learning disabilities. Williams allegedly told the young woman that she walked like a monkey. On the night of October the 30th, Williams was taken into police custody, charged with a racially aggravated public offense. She was due to appear in Bexley Magistrates Court on November the 9th of 2012. No further updates were provided in the immediate aftermath. Number 4. David McCarthy. In August of 2008, a hit-and-run accident near a sports bar in Joliet, Illinois, claimed the life of a 20-year-old University of Illinois student. Another motorist watched the car responsible for the crash activate its brake lights, swerve, then take off down the road. The witness subsequently came upon the lifeless body of the hit-and-run victim, Melissa Leck, The latter had reportedly spent the day drinking at a Chicago White Sox baseball game. At the time of the crash, she was walking in the 2800 block of McDonough Street on her way home after being denied admittance to a local bar because she was underage. The case went unsolved until one day in February of 2012 when Lex's sister, Michelle, heard her doorbell ring. She opened the front door to find a man in his late 20s standing outside. The stranger proceeded to give an unprompted confession claiming he'd been the driver who struck and killed Lex 4 years earlier. The man, identified as Naperville resident David McCarthy, told the victim's family he was trying to find his way back to Interstate 55 when he accidentally ran her over and fled the scene. Consequently, McCarthy was charged with hit and run and leaving the scene of an accident involving injury or death. In June of 2014, however, it was reported that the charges against him had been dropped. Psychologists for both the defense and prosecution determined that McCarthy made a false confession because of a mental disorder that caused him to experience delusions. Lex's mother, Maria, maintained her belief that McCarthy was, in fact, guilty of her daughter's killing, despite the charges against him being dismissed. As of the case's most recent updates, the authorities hadn't yet named another suspect. Number 3. Kenneth Montgomery. Police in Mesa, Arizona, were contacted by 27-year-old Albert Liotta on the morning of November the 21st of 2022. The man claimed that he and his mother, 61-year-old Antoinette Liotta, had been shot in the parking lot outside a Hobby Lobby near the area of Greenfield and Baseline Roads. According to local authorities, the two victims were sitting in separate vehicles that were parked next to each other when the shooting unfolded. Emergency crews rushed to the scene and pulled Antoinette out of her vehicle, whereupon she was pronounced dead by paramedics. Albert was taken to the hospital having suffered non-fatal gunshot wounds to both legs. Police officers were able to gather a description of the male suspect and his pickup truck. After speaking with eyewitnesses, about 2 hours later, law enforcement tracked the man down and found him climbing into the bed of a stranger's truck. He was identified as 65-year-old Kenneth Montgomery. Officers searched the man's pickup and stumbled upon a bloody handgun on the dashboard. Montgomery openly admitted to purchasing ammunition shortly before the shooting. He also confessed to going to the Hobby Lobby parking lot in search of the Liottas, thinking they'd been involved in prior criminal activity. The man parked his truck in front of the victims' vehicles and unloaded the clip into them. It was later reported that 10 shell casings were recovered from the scene of the crime. When asked if he'd intended to kill the Liottas, Montgomery said, "Damn right, anybody would have." He also stated that he felt no guilt over the incident. Officers brought Montgomery to the Maricopa County Jail on multiple charges, including second-degree murder and aggravated assault. He was held on a $1 million bond. Today's topic was requested by Mac717, Jay Burner, and April Shower 777. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Brian E. Mason. On March the 27th of 2023, Ohio man Brian E. Mason walked right up to an officer outside the Miamisburg Police Department and calmly stated, "I'm here to turn myself in." In jaw-dropping body cam footage, the 58-year-old went on to explain that he'd been showing an old friend how to use his .40 caliber firearm the previous night. At some point, the weapon inadvertently went off, striking Mason's friend in the chest. The man said he'd been running around scared all day after fleeing the house in a panic. The officer subsequently detained Mason, also asking him if his friend needed medical attention. Mason replied, "She's deceased." Later that evening, officers were dispatched to a Miami County home in the 1100 block of North Montgomery County Line Road. After receiving no response at the door, law enforcement made a forced entry. On the floor between the living room and kitchen, they came upon the lifeless body of 57-year-old Michelle L. Elliott, who'd suffered an apparent gunshot wound. Mason was consequently arrested on reckless homicide charges. He was already known to Miamisburg police because of a 2012 case in which he'd been convicted of attempted cultivation of marijuana. As a result of that ruling, Mason had his concealed carry license revoked and wasn't allowed to be in possession of the gun that killed Elliott. Therefore, he was also charged with a firearm specification and having a weapon while under a disability. Mason was ultimately found guilty by a county jury. In August of 2023, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison for the crime. After number 1, we have our previous release on When Talking Trash Goes Completely Wrong, lined up for those of you who can't get enough of this topic. Number 1. David Jungerman. In October of 2017, Missouri attorney Tom Pickett was gunned down on the front steps of his Kansas City home. The shooting occurred not long after Pickett won a multi-million-dollar lawsuit on behalf of one of his clients. The legal matter stemmed from an incident in which an elderly man by the name of David Jungerman fired a gun at Pickett's client, as well as 3 others. 80-year-old Jungerman reportedly thought the 4 men were stealing copper from his property. He was also served property liens shortly before Pickett was killed. Weeks later, the murder still yet to be solved, Jungerman went to a hearing in Vernon County Court. The man later left the courthouse without turning off the audio recorder he'd been using. In a recording unearthed during a search of Jungerman's home and business, he could be heard telling someone that he murdered that son of a, in reference to Pickett. In March of 2018, the baby furniture store owner allegedly told one of his employees that he'd killed the lawyer with a gun and gotten away with it because the lawyer stole his money. On March the 8th, Jungerman was involved in yet another shooting incident. He fired at a man whom he believed had stolen 780 pounds of iron pipe from him. He was subsequently held in custody without bond. Around this time, investigators were also considering him the prime suspect in Pickett's killing. Law enforcement's suspicions were corroborated by the damning audio recording found in his house, as well as the testimony of his employees. Jungerman was charged with first-degree murder, of which he was found guilty in September of 2022. The following year, a group of doctors from the Missouri Department of Mental Health ruled the man incompetent before he could be sentenced. While still awaiting punishment for the crime, Jungerman died in state custody on the morning of September the 25th of 2023. Number 7. Beaver County Brawl. Law enforcement in Harmony Township, Pennsylvania, were dispatched to the Baruni Hotel and Grill on Duss Avenue one day in October of 2013. After receiving reports of a stabbing. During the preliminary police investigation, it was determined that the incident had been precipitated by trash talk, centered around various sports topics. A male patron at the bar had reportedly been wearing a LeBron James jersey, triggering a heated argument as to whether James or Michael Jordan should be considered the greatest basketball player of all time. The topic eventually shifted to Pittsburgh's local teams, which was when tensions came to a head. A physical altercation subsequently broke out, during the course of which Armando Encinas allegedly pulled out a knife and started stabbing people. Baruni owner Alex Barlamas, employee Robert Gavlua, and patron Timothy Edwards all suffered wounds at the hands of Encinas, who was accompanied by his uncle Michael Landeros. The victims were each hospitalized, but the injuries were reportedly deemed to be non-life-threatening in nature. Both Encinas and Landeros were arrested in the incident's wake. The former was charged with attempted homicide and aggravated assault, while his uncle faced counts of misdemeanor, disorderly conduct, and simple assault. Number 6. Jessica Boes. New York woman Jessica Boes went on a drunken rant about her profound antipathy towards the police during a Facebook live stream on April the 26th of 2021, the 32-year-old Long Island mother was down in tequila shots, wine, and other alcoholic beverages on camera while talking about the trial of ex-Minnesota police officer Derek Chauvin, who was criminally charged in connection to the highly publicized death of George Floyd back in the summer of 2020. Throughout the nearly 2-hour live stream, Boes directed a number of derogatory remarks towards law enforcement and slammed the American justice system, all while NWA's F the Police played in the background. In the early hours of the following morning, the woman got behind the wheel of her maroon Volkswagen despite still being intoxicated. She blazed down the Long Island Expressway and eventually found herself in the path of a 14-year NYPD veteran named Anastasios Sakos. At the time, the latter was directing traffic away from a deadly car accident that had taken place on the expressway in Queens. When he noticed Boes' vehicle barreling towards him, 43-year-old Sakos ran for his life, but she slammed into him before he could get to safety. The officer was hit with such force that he was knocked out of his department-issued knee-high work boots, and his body went flying through the air before landing on a grassy median about 200 feet away. Boes' windshield was completely shattered as a consequence of the impact, but she nevertheless continued driving past multiple exits. When she was finally pulled over, the woman feigned ignorance in regards to the deadly crash, saying, "I did hear a thump, so I knew I hit something, but I didn't see what it was." Her blood alcohol level, which was tested a couple of hours after the incident, was determined to be nearly twice the legal driving limit, and she was also found to have been driving with a suspended license. Following her subsequent arrest, Boes was charged with second-degree manslaughter, second-degree aggravated manslaughter, second-degree vehicular manslaughter, and leaving the scene of an incident without reporting. She consequently faced the possibility of spending up to 15 years behind bars for the crime. It was reported that the trial would likely begin in the spring of 2023. Number 5. Justin Carter. A sarcastic comment made during an exchange of trash talk on Facebook landed a Texas teen behind bars. In February of 2013, 18-year-old Justin Carter and a friend were arguing with another individual about something related to the online multiplayer game League of Legends. At one point during the heated interaction, Carter claimed to be messed up in the head and wrote, "I think I'ma shoot up a kindergarten and watch the blood of the innocent rain down," before saying he'd eat his victim's beating heart. The teen, a New Braunfels resident, followed up the alarming pronouncement with LOL and JK in an apparent indication that his threats had been made in jest. Carter's comment, which he posted just 2 months after the school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, caught the attention of a woman in Canada who reported it to the authorities. Local law enforcement subsequently issued a warrant for Carter's arrest. He was taken into custody on a felony charge of making threats and was held at the Comal County Jail on a $500,000 bond. Facing the possibility of spending several years in prison, the young man admitted to making the snarky Facebook comment when questioned by police, but he and his attorney contended that it was completely harmless. A 4-year legal fight ensued wherein Carter, his family, and his supporters sought to have his criminal charges dismissed. Finally, in March of 2018, Carter pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of creating a false alarm. His felony charge was dropped and he was released with credit for time served. Number 4. Marte Logan. 24-year-old Terry Lowe was gunned down outside a liquor store in the 200 block of South Laramie Avenue in Chicago's Austin neighborhood on November the 13th of 2022. It would later emerge that the young man had exchanged a few choice words with Marte Logan, who rode around the block before emerging from the back seat of a car and opening fire. Lowe sustained gunshot wounds to his eye, face, head, torso, back, and legs and was pronounced dead at Stroger Hospital a short time after the shooting. Later that night, 20-year-old Logan reportedly boasted about committing the murder to a teenage girl. The following day, he showed the unnamed girl a picture of load that had been uploaded by Legal Help, a website that publishes bulletins of murder victims to seek information. Then on November the 24th, Logan got into an argument with the girl and a 17-year-old boy. He tailed them to the 2900 block of West Roosevelt Road, where he fired 8 rounds in their direction, then followed them onto the Eisenhower Expressway and fired more shots. The female victim was hit in the back and head, while her male companion was shot in the leg and the back as well. Both of the teens fortunately survived. Logan was arrested in December and consequently faced 1 felony count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder. Number 3. Zachary Gardner. In March of 2015, 22-year-old Huey Stanley Jr. and his cousins, Albert and Josh Cornell, went to the YMCA in Kingsport, Tennessee to play basketball. When they arrived, they came across a group of 4 teens, whom Albert was familiar with, and asked if they wanted to play a pickup game. They declined the offer and began playing amongst themselves, at which point Stanley started hurling insults at the group, directing much of his trash talk towards one teen in particular. The two exchanged words, with Stanley indicating he'd be willing to physically fight the boy if he were older. The teen subsequently called his brother, 22-year-old Zachary Gardner, to brawl with Stanley for him. In court, eyewitness testimony would later reveal that Stanley and his cousins went to a gas station while awaiting Gardner's arrival at the gym. When the two parties showed back up at the YMCA, a confrontation ensued. Gardner taunted Stanley for picking on a teenager, but the situation then abruptly turned violent. Stanley punched Gardner in the head, and after a brief fist fight, the latter pulled out a knife. The other young man was stabbed twice, once in the neck and once in the chest. The Cornell brothers rushed their cousin to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. In the aftermath, Gardner was taken into police custody on a charge of first-degree murder. Throughout the ensuing criminal proceedings, the young man maintained that he'd acted in self-defense during his deadly altercation with Stanley. The prosecution contended that Gardner had premeditated the murder, but much of the testimony provided by the state's witnesses seemed to suggest that the defendant had been attacked initially before retaliating in the interest of self-preservation. In June of 2016, after deliberating for 2.5 hours, a jury found Gardner not guilty of murder, and he was subsequently released from custody. Number 2. Karin Watson. On the evening of July the 7th of 2022, the police in Dayton, Ohio, were called to the O'Reilly Auto Parts store on West 3rd Street for a report of a shooting on the premises. Upon arrival, officers found a woman suffering from a non-life-threatening gunshot wound. She was taken to Miami Valley Hospital by her boyfriend and was discharged a few days later. As was captured on cell phone video that subsequently went viral, the victim had been involved in a physical altercation with one of the store's employees, identified as 31-year-old Karin Watson. The latter had reportedly been helping the woman find a car part when she became upset and started making threats. Watson told investigators that the customer beat her about the head with her fists, and the two women subsequently brawled in the middle of the store. At one point, they broke away from one another, whereupon Watson retrieved a firearm and shot the other woman. She claimed to have acted in self-defense because she thought the customer was ramping up for another attack when she fired the weapon preemptively. Watson was taken into custody on 2 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of felonious assault, with her bond set at a reported $50,000. Number 1. Cameron Hogg. On October the 3rd of 2022, contentious trash talk erupted after a pickup basketball game between 2 friends at Terry Park in Dallas, Texas. In subsequent reports, the individuals involved were identified as 31-year-old Cameron Hogg and Asia Womack, aged 21. The latter won the game, after which she began teasing Hogg, who evidently took the loss to heart and subsequently lashed out in violence. A short time after the pickup game, Hogg tracked Womack down to another location where she and a friend were sitting outside with a TV hooked up. watching football. Hogg pulled out a firearm and shot the young woman multiple times, killing her. He remained on the run from the authorities until October the 22nd, when he was finally taken into custody on a murder charge. The man reportedly had a criminal history, including past arrests for robbery, domestic violence, and aggravated assault. Hogg remained in the Dallas County Jail without bond as he awaited the next steps of the legal proceedings. Thanks for watching. For a month, would you rather always say the first thing that pops in your head or lose the ability to speak? Let us know in the comments section below.